So then the next one that I want to talk about is social relationship stress. So these are things such as team dynamics within your occupational environment, it's family, it's reintegration for those people that have been overseas, it's your social situations that you move in, so sports teams, social clubs, these sort of things. So it's all of those relationships where you're interacting with other people. So there's plenty of benefits associated with positive social relationships. And when we look at a lot of the research around longevity, mental health, positive outcomes, pretty much most of the things that you sort of come across within this landscape is that social connectedness continually turns up as the number one factor associated with all positive outcomes. So if there was one thing that you wanted to focus on, or one area where you can sort of the lowest hanging fruit or the biggest rock to move, it would be social connectedness. So things that it can benefits here, or benefits that you can experience here are building trust, teamwork, emotional resilience, these are things, because we always like to have someone else around, especially if there's someone that we can confide in, we can trust, or that we know that we work really closely with or have those sort of strong relationships with. It can strengthen our communication and conflict resolution skills, so they don't always have to be really positive situations, or we don't always have to make sure that we're avoiding any type of negativity within these relationships, is because we can build some of our skills around conflict resolution, perspective taking, understanding someone else's context, empathy, all these sort of skills by having really robust relationships, And it can promote social support, reduce perceived stress, a whole range of positive factors. And then when it comes to the negative impacts of our social relationships, because as I said, they're not always positive, and negative social relationships in turn can turn up as some of the strongest factors when it comes to sort of poor mental well-being, mental health, these type of things, is that we can experience toxic leadership, we can experience poor team cohesion, and that can increase that stress response or our threat response, because we just don't want to interact with those people, or every time they're near, we become guarded, or we sort of go into that stress response type of behavior. It can increase our anxiety and increase the risk of depression, Things such as family separation, which unfortunately shows up as one of the strongest indicators of really severe mental health outcomes, or sort of suicidal thoughts, these type of things, is that we can experience these through deployments, through shift work, through actual separations of relationships, and that can put us in emotional distress, that can increase the PTSD risk, these type of things, And like I said, some of these things we can control, but not all of them we can control, but we can put in mitigating factors around it, And the impact on allostatic load for these type of things is that strong team bonds reduces the allostatic load, and is a protective factor. So having really good relationships is a stress reliever, it's a mitigating factor, whereas chronic social conflict results in really high allostatic load, mental exhaustion, burnout, mental health issues, these types of things. So social interactions are one of the strongest areas or factors when it comes to allostatic loading. And when we think about these things working in conjunction with other stresses, is that if you're in an operational environment where you'll go out and experience really high operational stress just from a critical response situation, and then when you come back to your team environment, it's a toxic environment, you're going from one threatening environment or stressor into another one, So there's no time there to decompress. Wherever you go from your operational environment into a sort of more nurturing, a cohesive team environment, that's when you can de-stress. So these factors work not just in isolation, but in conjunction with each other. Well, it's the same as if you do a really long, arduous shift and you go home, and your home environment's not really conducive to de-stressing, that you're going into another stress-related or another load or loading area when it comes to that allostatic load. So some of the mitigation strategies that we can look at are peer support programs, structured team building activities, things that actually are evidence-based or have really solid evidence behind them, because some of these things can be hit and miss. And then relationship maintenance strategies for long-term deployments, for family, for social events like that, these sort of things, because really strong relationships you need to invest in, or you need to do a bit of work around them. Otherwise they can disintegrate if you're not putting any effort into them. So the next one I want to talk about is physical training. And this is something that we generally do have a fair bit of control over, unless we're in an environment where physical training is dictated to us. But again, we can determine how some of that goes for us. So these are things like exercise, load bearing, combat drills, all these sort of things. So these can have a positive and a negative, like all of our other stresses. So the positives are it can improve cardiovascular endurance, muscle strength, injury resistance, joint integrity, all these sort of things. You can enhance mental resilience and stress tolerance through controlled fatigue when it comes to more sort of physical exertion. They don't always transfer to other areas of stress. And that's the thing we need to understand when we're talking about exposure to stress, is that it may only ever be near transfer and not far transfer, in that it doesn't always transfer to other non-related activities. So trying to build really high levels of mental stress through overloading physical stress is probably more likely to result in injury risk rather than increased mental resilience after a certain point. It can increase dopamine, serotonin, improving mood, cognitive function, all these sort of things. So there's plenty of benefits for physical performance or for physical training, and it's probably one of the top three when it comes to factors associated with really good outcomes. So the negatives to this are that overtraining without recovery can lead to chronic fatigue, decreased immune function, hormonal imbalances. Okay, it can result in increased injury risk. Okay, it can result in muscle atrophy. If we're doing too much, we can actually start to break down. It can result in a whole heap of negative consequences from too much loading. Okay, and excessive load bearing without proper mechanics. Okay, joint degradation, musculoskeletal injuries. Okay, you can end up with a whole heap of negative consequences if you're overloading too much, or if you're not allowing enough recovery from your exposure to physical training stresses. Then the allostatic loading impacts. Moderate training gives us a really good adaptive response, okay? And that's that low to mild allostatic load, where excessive training without recovery is high allostatic load. Again, leads to burnout, injury risk, fatigue, sleep disruptions, all these sort of things. It can lead to suppression of appetite, all these sort of things, and actually impact your ability to recover. Okay, so again, mitigation strategies are periodization, so you're following the principles or evidence-based principles of good exercise prescription. Okay, alternating high intensity and recovery days. Okay, tactical recovery strategies, which are things like sleep, mobility work, structured deload weeks, nutritional planning. Okay, all these sort of things, making sure that you're not flogging yourself up physically before you've got a really long, arduous day at work. Okay, and making sure you're in an environment where outside of that, you're not got another social stress, because you just don't want to keep putting these stresses on each other. Okay, and increasing the total allostatic load. Okay, the next one I'll talk about is nutritional stress. Yes, and we can get stress from nutrition. So this is things like fasting, calorie restriction, nutrient timing. Okay, all of these actually impose a stress on the body, and done the right way, they can be a positive stress. If they're not done correctly, it can be a negative stress. Okay, so some of the positives we can experience from these are things like improving insulin sensitivity and metabolic efficiency. It can enhance autophagy and cellular repair. Okay, so it can support mental clarity and fat adaptation for endurance. We can get a lot of benefits when we know what we're doing, and we're using a very well-researched, evidence-based strategy to do it. Okay, following something from your favorite social media site, potentially not the best way to make sure that you're getting the right allostatic load, or that you're sort of controlling that loading. Okay, some of the negatives can be chronic under-eating, okay, where we'll experience muscle loss, hormone dysregulation, and impaired recovery. Okay, fasting or high exertion periods, we can get low blood sugar, decreased performance. It can result in the breakdown of muscle. It can result in an energy deficiency, or where we don't have enough actual energy, and that has a change on our cognitive function or an impact on cognitive function. There can be a whole heap of negative consequences if we're not doing this correctly. Okay, so we need to make sure that we're balancing nutrition with our work output, okay, and structure that accordingly. So when it comes to the impact on allostatic load, so strategic fasting, okay, can provide positive adaptation. Okay, eating to your energy output can provide you with the right energy balance, so that you're not losing or gaining weight, okay, depending on what you're after. Okay, things like chronic underfeeding in high stress conditions can increase that allostatic load burden, or if we're not taking in the right nutritional requirement. And something to bear in mind is that it's not just physical activity. Really high cognitive or mental exertion actually takes up a lot of our energy as well. So we have to make sure that we're consuming enough calories, that we're supporting both our physical exertion and our cognitive function, because even though our brain is only about 4% of our body, it takes up about 20% of its cognitive requirements. So we need to make sure that if we're in a situation where we're trying to lose weight, or we're under eating, or we're restricted in what we have access to for nutrient, is that we're getting enough to maintain cognitive function as well as our physical exertion requirements. Okay, so some of these nutrition strategies can be fasting when workload is low, if that's what you're into, so not during high demand periods, or eating the right amount of calories that you need for the work output requirement. Okay, nutrition timing, which is prioritizing protein and carbs post-training. Okay, eating around really big days, eating less around lower days. Okay, I'm not going to provide any specific nutritional advice because that's not really my domain, but understanding that your eating should match your requirements. Okay, if you do have specific diets, make sure that you're following something that works for you and has really sound evidence base behind it.